I think what it reveals is that the government might actually have finally realised that when it has a massive majority in Parliament, it won an overwhelming victory at the election, that the public are telling it has the power to do stuff.
One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett. In last night's speech, Treasurer Jim Chalmers called this budget the most important and ambitious in decades.
Important because the world is throwing a lot at us, and this budget is about helping Australia deal with those challenges. And ambitious because we have so much going for us, and this budget is about Australia seizing those opportunities.
In the face of global uncertainty brought about by the United States and Israel's illegal war in Iran, the Treasurer framed his fifth budget around 3 R's.
It's a responsible budget and it's a reforming budget, which builds resilience and bolsters our economy.
And there are meaningful changes to the tax system, particularly around housing. But is it ambitious enough for the people who need the support the most? Joining me to discuss the federal budget and last night's speech from the Treasurer is Australia Institute senior economist Matt Grudnoff. G'day, Matt.
Hello, Eb.
It's your favourite time of year, I know.
It is definitely my favourite time of year. I feel like doing that jumping on the couch that Tom Cruise did, but I will restrain myself.
Yes,
I will
just
restrain
calm down. But obviously, we have talked on this podcast many times about what is needed to make housing more affordable, and in particular, the need to reform the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing. It's finally happened,
Yay.
Matt. We are here. First of all, can you talk us through the changes that were announced last night?
Yeah, so they're changing both the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing. Let me start with negative gearing. Negative gearing, if you did it before, if you bought a house before 7:30 p.m. last night, so when the Treasurer got up to
Hope
start
you got
his
all
speech,
in there quick.
yeah, then you have negative gearing and you're completely grandfathered. Going forward, if you haven't, then you can only negatively gear if it's a brand new property. So they want to still encourage new houses to get built. For if investors want to invest in housing, they have to buy new housing stock.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're buying an existing house, you can no longer negatively gear.
You can still buy it as an investment property.
Absolutely.
But you can't negatively gear it.
That's right. And you can still write off rental income.
Yep.
You just can't write off your wage, your unrelated income to the property.
Yeah.
With the capital gains tax discount, it used to be 50%, and that was the one we all hated because it was driving up house prices and encouraging investors in. They've reverted that back to an old system that occurred before the discount came in, where it was basically discounted by inflation. So if the inflation rate was 2.5% a year and your house went up by 5% a year, then you'd pay capital gain on 2.5%. So half of that 5%, 2.5% would be taken away and you'd only have to pay capital gain on that. So it was discounted effectively by the inflation rate. This grandfathering is actually a better system. Basically, going forward, you'll be under the new regime, the new system. So you'll get the 50% discount for any capital gains that happened before the change, but going forward, you'll be under the new inflation-based system. So everybody will be under the new system.
So if you bought an investment property, let's say in 2010, to give us a round number,
yep,
and you sell it in 2030, when do the changes apply for you to this new regime?
They start in July next year.
Yep.
So all the capital gain you made from 2010 to July 2027.
Yep.
So the asset will have to be valued at that point.
Yep.
That will be under the 50% discount.
Yep.
But all the capital gain from 2027 up to 2030 when you sell it, that will be under the the new inflation-based system.
Okay. And so you were saying that's a better grandfathering system than what we might have expected. Why is that, Matt?
Well, because the problem with grandfathering is not that it doesn't change past decisions. So take the negative gearing thing. It's that it actually people get it going forward. So if you bought your house before yesterday, right, and you're negatively geared, you get that negative gearing for as long as it's negatively geared going forward. So it's not so much grandfathering, it's protecting one group of people, and new people who get in the market can't take advantage of that same system. And so that's the problem with grandfathering, at least with the capital gains tax changes. Everybody's on the same system from July next year.
Moving forward.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And so obviously we've talked about this a lot in the past, but what do we expect that this will do to house prices, and what will it do, for example, if you're a first-home buyer looking down the barrel of trying to get your first house in the next few years?
Well, what it's going to do is it's going to discourage investors. Now, that means that those houses don't just vanish because they're not sold to investors. They actually get sold to owner-occupiers. And in particular, if investors are getting out in bulk, then they must be replaced by first home buyers.
Yep.
New homeowners are coming into the market. So if you're a first home buyer, if you're trying to get into the market, then this is absolutely great news. This will give you an advantage in the market. So previously, these huge tax concessions, negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount, they gave an advantage to investors. And those advantages have been wound back, which means as a first home buyer, you get a leg up and you'll have an advantage. So if you think about it, if you're looking at buying an existing property, investors are going to be a lot less interested in buying existing properties because they can't get negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount has changed.
Doesn't apply. Yep.
So if you're going to the auction and you're bidding against a bunch of people, you're not going to be bidding against very many investors. You're far more likely to be bidding against other people who want to buy the home to actually live in it. And that's where the real advantage is. That's who's going to benefit the most from these changes. It's first home buyers trying to get into the market.
And of course, every successful first home buyer is one less renter.
That's exactly right. So it's not going to impact rents. Why? Because every time a first home buyer buys a rental property, there's one less rental property, but that first home buyer is no longer a renter. So there's one less family who want to rent.
So since the budget speech last night, the Coalition Treasury spokesperson, Tim Wilson, has been out there kind of saying that these moves will negatively impact housing supply and reference the budget papers in that, but therefore will hurt younger Australians who are looking to buy a house.
Under their own government documents, these new taxes will actually lead to 35,000 fewer homes being built across the decade. Their own documents admit that it will lead to higher rents. People who want to go and buy their first home tend to rent beforehand, and they're going to be kneecapped on their journey.
How would you respond to those comments?
Well, that's just not right. You can still get negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount if you buy a new property. All right. So if the old system did encourage new supply, then it's going to continue to encourage new supply. So it's not going to stop supply because you can still get both of those things if you buy a new property. What this stops is investors buying existing property. It doesn't stop them, sorry, that's the wrong word. It discourages them from buying existing stock of housing that's already been built. So it's going to do nothing to slow supply. And look, if Tim Wilson and the opposition want to go out there and barrack for investors and wealthy people, I think that's probably a fight that the government is very, very happy to have. To be really serious, this government thinks that there is a huge political advantage in trying to actually solve the housing crisis, apart from putting up policies that you and I have talked about endlessly, policies that don't work.
Like the 5% home deposit
There's
scheme.
a litany of pretty much all of them. After every budget, we hear that I can remember, almost every budget that I can remember, there have been policies that the government of the day have said will help home ownership and help first home buyers. And instead of helping them, we've seen house prices continue to increase far faster than incomes. So the evidence says that none of them worked. And we said at the time that none of them worked. This is the first time we've actually seen a policy that's going to be worked. So I think the Labor Party's policy right now is to actually introduce a policy that will actually make homes more affordable. And, that's going to help younger generations, which is who they're pitching this to.
Yeah. And just to be clear for people, the Treasurer has been kind of talking about that this will mean that house prices, they're not going to go backwards, but they won't grow as rapidly as they have in the past. So what's the effect of that?
Yeah. So look, it has taken 25 years to screw up the housing market, and we've done a brilliant job of it. Like we have screwed it up so well. We should be very proud and pat ourselves on the back. But it means that we can't fix that kind of stuff up in a year, right? So what is probably going to happen is house prices are going to remain relatively flat, but people's incomes are going to rise every year.
And catch up.
Exactly right. So if you think about over the next 15 years, incomes might rise by, say, about 50%. So over the next 15 years, people will have 50% more income to buy a house, buying houses that are roughly the same price as they are today. And so if that happens, then housing will become more affordable.
For more people.
Exactly right. So I don't expect there to be a big drop in house prices. I expect them to remain relatively flat. And that's certainly what we saw in Victoria when they changed their rules 3 years ago and pushed investors out with higher investor taxes. House prices in Melbourne, for example, have barely changed in 3 years.
And so if you're a person who has bought a house and you only have one house, you're an owner-occupier, and you're worried about what's going to happen to house prices, what would your message to them be from this budget?
You're going to be neither better off nor worse off. And the reason for that is your house price is going to remain flat, right? So if you sell in 10 years' time, you're not going to make any capital gain on your house. But also, when you sell the house you live in, you're going to have to go and then use that money to buy another house. Well, the house you buy has also been flat for 10 years. So you're not getting behind at all. So people who basically are paying off a mortgage or own the home they live in, they're not going to be disadvantaged by this. Certainly, first home buyers are going to be advantaged by this, and investors are going to be discouraged. But let's be clear, investors have seen massive house price increases. They've seen massive capital gains over the last 25 years. Even in the last 3 years, house prices have increased by 20%. So let's say you've gotten into investing in houses quite late in the last 3 years. You bought an $800,000 house 3 years ago. That's probably increased by $160,000.
Yeah.
If you now decide, right, these changes are not for me, I'm going to sell, you're going to sell, you'll pay under the capital gains tax, the old system. If you sell like in the next year, you'll probably pay about, once you get rid of, all the costs of selling and buying, you're probably going to walk away with $100,000 for 3 years of investment.
Yeah.
Right. So nobody's losing out of this. It's just going forward, investors won't be able to make as much money from housing because housing prices aren't going to increase as fast.
As dramatically.
And that's how people have been making money.
Okay.
But go and invest in something else.
Yeah. All right. Not that this is financial advice.
This is definitely not financial advice.
War in the Middle East has been pushing up prices, pushing down growth and punishing Australians. We didn't decide when this war began, and we have no control over when it will properly end. But how we respond is up to us, how we help each other through, and how we come out of this a stronger, fairer, more productive and more resilient nation.
So in the introduction, I kind of talked about the war in Iran. Obviously, that's been a huge global shock, in addition to the appalling loss of life that we've seen in that country and elsewhere in the region. But with the ongoing closure of the Strait of Hormuz, fuel prices in Australia remain high. They're likely to stay high. That impacts on transport and logistics for groceries and anything else that needs to be shipped around the country. So inflation's likely to, or prices are likely to stay high for some time. How is the government seeking to address that global shock in this budget?
Yeah, they've been very careful not to splash a whole lot of cash. And when they have handed some cash out, so they've got a new tax offset, it's not actually going to come in for a couple of years, right? So we expect that, certainly that we would hope that the war in Iran has resolved itself, in the next 2 years. And so that inflation shock should have passed through the economy. So they've been very careful not to splash a whole lot of cash now. That means that more vulnerable people are not getting as much help as they probably need during this time. But the government, I think, is far more worried about the accusation that they're causing inflation. Just to be clear, government spending is not causing any inflation at the moment, right? That's not the cause of it. But the perception is that it might be. That's certainly the line that the opposition is running, and it's one that the government is sensitive to. And I don't think there's anything in this budget that really massively increases demand. I would expect that government spending as a proportion of total demand is going to stay roughly the same. That is, it's not going to increase and push more inflation.
All right. So it's widely rumoured that the government would make changes to trusts last night in the budget, and we saw that. Can you walk us through what those changes are?
Yeah, so a trust, if you don't know what a trust is.
I was going to say, yeah, probably some people don't know.
Most people don't. Because only a small proportion of people actually take advantage of
Yeah,
trusts.
I've heard of it, but I don't have one.
No,
I don't know how they work.
It's only for very, very rich people. It's basically a way of owning assets that means you pay less tax. So you stick assets in a trust, and then technically the trust owns the asset. You don't own the asset. And then you can basically distribute the benefits from that trust, the income from the assets that are in the trust, how you want. And you can split income, and you can do all sorts of shenanigans with trusts in order to basically avoid tax. Discretionary trusts is what they've actually targeted. They are the worst. Basically, they don't exist for any real reason almost than basically avoiding tax and
or minimising tax.
Minimising tax, yeah, and basically avoiding other things because you don't actually own the asset. You can get around all sorts of other stuff. So they're not particularly good. The government has said, well, okay, you could have income from a trust, but you must pay at least 30% tax as a minimum on that income. And what that effectively means is that trusts are no longer a very good vehicle for minimising your tax. I've even seen advice coming out from accountants, which have basically said that now trusts are not an effective vehicle and they expect their use to decline because they're not going to be a tax minimisation vehicle going forward, which is exactly what we want to see.
Yeah. So how big are trusts? How many are there? Are they?
Yeah. So they've been growing quite rapidly, but from a small base.
Yeah.
But they are massive. There might not be lots of people getting income from a trust, but they are massive compared to their income. About almost a quarter of all income in Australia, if you add all the different incomes up in Australia, a quarter of it goes to a trust.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's enormous.
That is massive. And that's just going to a very small group of people.
Yeah.
So, for example, most people have never even heard of trusts, but if you earn more than $500,000 a year, half of those people have a trust.
Right.
Half of everybody earning more than $500,000 a year has a trust.
Okay.
Whereas almost nobody earning sort of average incomes has a trust.
Okay. Wow, that was really interesting. So there's also a new tax cut of $250 that you mentioned before, a working Australians tax offset. But as you said, WATO. We get so many funny acronyms, the Lamington and the Lamido. And so that won't come in until mid-2028.
Yep.
I think you kind of mentioned that was to stave off accusations that the government's causing inflation. But why is it called the Working Australians Tax Offset? Why is that some distinction there that we need to know about?
So we've had tax offset before, like the low and middle income tax offset. It means a tax offset means you get it when you submit your tax return. So not unlike a tax cut, you don't get it every time you get paid.
Week. Yeah.
You get it when you submit your tax return, and you don't have to do anything. It's just automatically applied to your tax return.
Yeah.
But this is only on wage salary income and small sole trader business income, right? That means if you earn all of your income from shares or properties or other forms that aren't working, then you don't get the tax offset. You only get it from wages income. Yeah. So, if you pay, like the vast majority of people get the vast majority of their income from wages.
Yeah.
And so the vast majority of people will get this. But it's trying to rebalance the tax system. So over time, the tax system has gotten really out of kilter, as I said, with trusts, right? a huge amount of income is now coming from investments, and it's going to a very small portion of people.
Yeah.
And they have lots of tricks in order to minimize tax, whereas the vast majority of people earn their income from wages, and they don't have very many ways of minimizing their tax.
Yeah.
So this is a way of trying to rebalance the tax system away from heavily taxing people who work and lightly taxing people who earn it from assets.
From wealth.
And we see that through the changes to the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing and on trusts as well. So that's kind of taxing assets more heavily. But this tax offset will basically go to wage earners in order to reduce the tax you pay on wages.
So that's a lot of the, I guess, tax reforms that we've thought are really important. But there was some pretty big cuts to the NDIS. And you've just mentioned that tax offset that's, I'm guessing, only going to people who get an income, but not necessarily to people. Was there anything in there for if you're unemployed, for example,
Nothing.
Or a student or something
No,
like that?
Very, very little on it's certainly not going to lift people who are unemployed out of poverty. There was very little for welfare recipients at all.
Okay.
A big part of our savings package will restore the NDIS to its original intent and secure its future so it grows in a sustainable way in line with programs like Medicare. This difficult but necessary reform will save $37.8 billion over the forward estimates.
And the NDIS cuts, what does that actually look like in the budget? I know we kind of had announcements beforehand, but...
Yeah, so it's as it was announced, these cuts are brutal, but we've got some numbers for them now. More than half of all of the government's savings in this budget are from NDIS recipients.
Okay.
They just come from cuts to the NDIS. The cuts are so large that in the last year of the forward estimates in 2029-30, when the cuts are fully implemented, they will be costing the NDIS $16 billion a year. Now, that's 25% tax gas export money. That's a huge amount of money, $16 billion every year coming from the NDIS. So they are massive, brutal cuts.
Yeah. The government is obviously arguing that they're necessary to ensure the sustainability of the system, but I'm guessing from the size of that cut, basically it means a bunch of people won't have access to it anymore.
Yeah, by the government's own estimates, 160,000 people will be culled. So when these fully implemented, 160,000 less people will be able to access the NDIS. So they're saying it's to preserve it, but it kind of feels like we're, when we talk about preserving something like the NDIS, you'd hope that it's to preserve it so people can access it. This feels more like preserving it like it's the Mona Lisa and it's behind bulletproof glass. And the reason it's preserved is nobody can access it.
Yeah.
And the problem with these cuts is that sure, it reduces the cost of the NDIS, but if it comes at the price of people who need it not being able to access it, then is that really preserving it?
Yeah. All right. I want to come next to the gas export tax, which was not in the budget, as the Prime Minister, I guess, flagged. But we did get a gas reservation policy. So what is that? How is that different to a gas export tax? What do we expect will happen as a result of that gas reservation policy?
Yeah, so a gas reservation policy will raise no revenue at all. So it doesn't increase taxes on the gas industry at all. What it basically just tells the gas industry is you have to sell a certain proportion of gas. In this case, the government's saying 20%. You have to sell 20% of the gas to Australians. You have to sell it in Australia to Australians, and then you can export the other 80%.
Yeah.
And so what that does is it increases the supply of gas going to Australia, which reduces the price.
Yep.
So if you're buying gas in Australia, you're going to get that gas at a lower price. But as I said, it doesn't raise a single cent of extra revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And the advantage of the 25% gas export tax that everybody's asking for is not only does it raise $17 billion a year, but it also lowers the price domestically. So if you want to avoid paying that if you're a gas company and you want to avoid paying that 25% tax, you can sell it to Australians and pay no tax at all. It's only on
an export tax.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So not only does it raise revenue, but it also acts like that reservation policy where it forces gas companies, or gas companies choose in order to try and avoid that tax,
Yeah.
to sell gas domestically. So the gas tax is better than this reservation policy because it achieves lower gas prices in Australia, but it also raises
revenue.
an enormous amount of revenue that we can then use for other things.
And what was that? We calculated at $17 billion a year, roughly $350 million a week.
Yep, that's right. $350 million a week. If they'd introduced the gas tax when they were first elected in 2022, they would have raised an extra $70 billion by now. $70 billion. Can you imagine what we could have done with $70 billion since 2022
We'd probably
in extra gas revenue?
We'd probably be having some very different conversations about the NDIS, for example.
Exactly.
We don't have a gas export tax, but we've heard a lot in recent months about the fact that the government collects more money from beer drinkers than from the petroleum resource rent tax.
Yep.
I'm guessing we got some new figures for that in the budget last night. What did that show?
The Treasurer, just before the budget dropped, was saying the PRT, the petroleum resource rent tax revenue, was going to be revised upwards.
Happy days.
Yeah, so maybe now the gas industry are paying more than beer excise. Unfortunately, no. They were revised up, but you needed a magnifying glass to see the upward revisions.
Yeah.
And they actually still fall over the forward estimates, right? So they've gone up a bit.
Yep.
But then they drop by a third. The revenue over the next 4 years, PRT revenue during the middle of a gas boom
backwards
is going down by a third. So it's going from 1.9 billion down to 1.3 billion. Meanwhile, beer excise is above 2.5 billion. So it's well above beer excise. The wedge between it is becoming larger.
Yeah.
But what's most interesting about that is during the recent inquiry into gas, the gas industry said you've just got to wait. By the end of this decade, right, in the next 4 years, we're going to start seeing big PRT revenue come through.
Yeah.
By big, they meant 1.3 billion compared to a gas export tax of 17 billion.
Yeah.
And also what we meant was that revenue would be going down.
In the middle of another global energy crisis.
Yep.
Unbelievable. Is there anything else interesting in this budget that stood out to you, Matt?
One of the most interesting things for me was actually what was not in the budget, and it's about, I suppose, bullets that we've avoided in the past. People might remember going back to the mid-2010s, there was a proposal to cut company tax.
I do remember this.
And the Australia Institute was at the forefront of the fight to stop that.
Yep.
Well, the budget this year raised an extra $22 billion in revenue because those company tax cuts didn't go through.
Just this year.
Just this year.
$22 billion.
Can you imagine the conversations we would be having right now if they had cut that company tax and the budget was $22 billion with less revenue?
Yeah.
The extra cuts that we would be facing and all the different things that we would have to cope with because that revenue would have been lost and basically just given away to
companies
Yep.
and their profits. Matt, we are fond of saying around here that budgets reveal choices. What does this budget reveal about the Australian government's priorities?
I think what it reveals is that the government might actually have finally realised that when it has a massive majority in Parliament, it won an overwhelming victory at the election, that the public are telling it has the power to do stuff. And what it's decided to do is tackle housing affordability, one of the biggest issues facing Australians. What it's decided to do is tackle inequality, particularly intergenerational inequality.
Mm-hmm.
So it's now targeting more taxation towards the wealthy by, for example, tackling trusts.
Trusts, yeah.
And it's handing that back to people who work for a living. And I think that's only a good thing. But look, there is still plenty of room for improvement. The government could have gone further in a lot of areas, in particular around taxing our resources. The fact that there is nothing on gas taxes is the biggest hole in this budget.
And just before we finish up, I've seen quite a lot of the discourse in the media last night was really focusing on this idea that the government had broken promises. But where you were talking about their priority being, I guess, fixing inequality, What does that tell you about their approach and the calculation that the government made with the budget that they delivered last night?
Yeah, breaking promises, they absolutely have done that. I'm not a politician. I don't have to dance around that. They said before the last election that they wouldn't make changes in this area. But the brutal political reality is that a broken promise is only a problem if the public don't want that to change.
Yeah.
And the great example of that is the stage 3 tax cuts. We were fighting for them to change the stage 3 tax cuts for years.
They promised they wouldn't.
They promised they wouldn't. And that was basically the main argument they had. They thought that the stage 3 tax cuts were rubbish and they didn't want them, but they had made a promise. When they finally did make that change, right, they weren't hammered for it, right? They went to the next election saying, look what we did. Look how we changed the stage 3 tax cut. And the opposition never mentioned it again. In fact, I think the opposition voted for the changes to the stage 3 tax cut.
They did,
right?
yeah.
That's an example of a broken promise where everybody thought it was a great idea,
Yeah.
right? And so it wasn't a problem. I think that these changes are the same. I think that the public well and truly understands that housing affordability is a massive issue in Australia and that it's time for governments to do something about it that will actually make a difference, and this will actually make a difference.
So the government's essentially made the calculation that solving the housing affordability crisis is more important than keeping an outdated promise, I guess.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for chatting with me again.
This episode was recorded on Wednesday, the 13th of May, and some things may have changed since recording. If you want to read more from our researchers on the budget, on taxing gas, fixing housing, and much more, check out thepoint.com.au for all our budget analysis. And the latest Vantage Point essay from Australia Institute Press is available now. In Rich Kid, Poor Kid, The Battle for Public Education, best-selling author and Walkley Award-winning journalist Jane Caro examines the origins of Australia's public education crisis. In the essay, Caro lays bare decades of poor policy choices and outlines what governments can do to create the public education system Australians deserve. Available for $19.95, Pod listeners can get free shipping by using the code PODVP, that's PODVP, at checkout. And if one edition isn't enough, subscribe to Vantage Point and get 4 editions every year for just $64.95. Visit australiainstitute.org.au/store to order yours today. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.